Well, violence is escalating here in Chicago. Every weekend brings another round of tragic shootings. Chicago's newly appointed police superintendent, Eddie Johnson, says in part it's because of a criminal justice system that allows known criminals to cycle into jail only to be released back on the streets a short time later to commit more crimes.
We know who they are. Oftentimes they have gang affiliations, and many have had previous arrests and convictions. 36, 26, 24, 25, 30, 31, 37, 41, and 20. That's just a sample of the number of times the victims on this list have been arrested. Until we can have real truth in sentencing and hold these offenders accountable, this will be the unfortunate reality in the city of Chicago.
Well, the new superintendent of the Chicago Police is saying that judges are at fault for not keeping criminals in prison long enough, that many of these violent offenders only serve about half their sentences. Is he right?
You know, I want to speak to the idea of prevention and diversion. You know, they do have tools, judges, at their disposal to really help divert nonviolent offenders into giving them treatment in lieu of incarceration.
But just forgive me for a moment. I think Johnson here is talking about he's talking about people who commit crimes with guns.
Right. I would have to agree.
And how about you?
He is correct. It is a small number of people that's driving a high number of the offenses. The problem with the mandatory minimums is, like I mentioned earlier, it's such a broad tool. You may or may not capture some of these people and incapacitate them for longer periods of time, but you'll also be doing a lot of collateral damage to communities. And when you put somebody away for 20 years in a box downstate and then just release them back into the streets with no services, no help, no rehabilitation, what's going to happen? It's just going to perpetuate the cycle of violence.
But Brian, I think ordinary Chicagoans may look at this and say, wait a minute. We're having the most violent years since the 1990s. The murder rate is out of control. Is there any political appetite for shortening sentences?
Well, I think there's definitely a role for prisons and incarceration, used judiciously when needed. But the fact is that 97% of all offenders do get out eventually. Sentences do end. And the issue is not just a crime problem. Crime rates fluctuate from year to year and from month to month, but it's an economic problem as well. 48% of ex-offenders are returning to prison within 3 years, in part because a simple thing like finding a job is so difficult. If you talk to ex-offenders, they'll tell you the single biggest thing keeping them out of crime will be able to find work and employment. Most offenders are parents. They have children. So if you make it difficult to find a job, they'll turn, unfortunately, to illegal activities to support themselves.
Nellie, both the current superintendent, and his predecessor, Jerry McCarthy, agreed on one thing, that gun crimes should get longer sentences and drug crimes shorter ones. Is that something that you agree with?
Right, and I want to say Brian just touched on something really important. If you look at the ecosystem where we're seeing crime occur that escalates into violent crime, we're looking at really poverty. So as people are living in an ecosystem that's poverty-stricken, the consequences are crime, violence, and incarceration, right? So for us, the work that we do at A Safe Haven is really about trying to address it as early as possible. As soon as we identify that someone is poverty-stricken and living in a dysfunctional environment in their home, or has a drug and alcohol problem in their home, being able to divert them to a program that's going to address the root causes, connect the dots with the right services, and get them back into jobs. Now, that's one of the things that we do, is we do get ex-offenders and people that have a criminal justice background into the workforce by the work that we do with the transitional jobs and the employment services that we offer to employers to hire people that are really vetted and are ready to go back to work. So that's how we break the recidivism.
We're going to talk more about jobs in just a minute. One of the specific recommendations from this task force report is that judges should get more discretion in sentencing. What do you guys think about that?
I agree. Each case is different, and these are individual human beings. There's different factors in each case, and the judge is in a better position to weigh that, whereas if you take that power away, you will be overdoing it in some cases and underdoing it in others.
Brian, is the public going to go along with that?
I think so. I think people understand the idea that there are a lot of drug offenders who really need help, not incarceration, who've been put away for too long. And judges weren't able to use discretion to put them into treatment programs. They were just sort of put away into jail. So that discretion is really necessary, I think, because people are realizing, especially with the heroin epidemic in Illinois, that drug use should be treated as a public health problem and be addressed that way instead of simply locking someone away and hoping it fixes itself.